Hi, this is Lauren, and you're listening to my Spiritual Awakening. Tonight, I actually have a special guest. She is the author of Seven Course Meal for Your Soul. She's also a oneness trainer in Las Vegas, and she's a very dear friend of mine, Miss Angi Covington. And I want to thank you for being here tonight.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
So, tonight, I really wanted to discuss It's All in Your Head. I think that Angi and I have been through some major shifts together, which most people wouldn't make it through. And I thought that she would be a great person to kind of explain how to get through the rambling in your head and how to release the ego. So to start it off tonight, I have a question for you, and that is, how has your transition through awakening been so far?
Can you say roller coaster? Really, it's like an amusement park. There's some things that have been so amazing and so divine, but yet there have been a lot of things that have challenged me in ways that I never thought I would ever experience, let alone walk through.
So what's the difference for you since shifting, as we call it?
For me, I think it's a perspective. You know, they talk about, there's that saying, I don't know where it came from, but before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
Okay.
After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, right? I mean, you're doing the same things. It's really just your experience of them that really changes. It's not that all your problems go away, but you are just looking at things from a different perspective, a wider, a higher perspective.
Okay. And one of the major things I want to touch base on is in relationships. You see people that we argue. We constantly have our point of views. We have to be right. Our story tells us that we are right, no matter what, and we will stand firmly by that. Why do you think that relationships fail, marriages end, families argue, and friendships are lost?
Well, I think it is the exact reason you just mentioned. When I started to have greater awareness of this whole perspective thing, I began to realize really quickly that every argument I've had in my whole life with anyone has really come from the fact that we both share different perspectives, and we have this overwhelming desire to have the other person agree with our perspective. So every argument is me trying to convince you that where I stand and what I see is the right thing, and you're trying to convince me that what you're seeing and where you are is the right thing, when in fact they're both right. So I think is the biggest problem in relationships, at least have been in mine, I think.
So how do you think you get past that? Because for someone that isn't going through this shift yet, or is at the beginning of it, they're still caught up in the ego, and I'm right, this is my story, and unless you agree with me, I don't want anything to do with you. How do you get past that with them?
You know, I have to say, it really is, it depends on perspective, again, and the level of consciousness, because I feel blessed in, again, my process, that I was able to now see things from this new perspective. But when I had my other perspective, that was the only perspective. So I couldn't really help it, because that was really what I saw. And someone says, well, I was standing here and I said, and I'm like, no, you were sitting there and you said. And you know what I mean? All these things weren't really jiving, but it was so real to me. Now it's still real to me, but I also know that what they're seeing is real to them. And there's room, I think, to acknowledge that, right?
I can agree. Okay.
And, you know, now, when you're really lucky, you get two of you together, like when me and you talk, and we can have a conversation, and I'm okay with you seeing your way, and I love it, and you're okay seeing my way, and you love it, and everything's good. So I think that's really the benefit, I think, as consciousness elevates for the rest of humanity. You know, there's some of us who are on the path. There are people who've been on it probably since before I was born, let alone before you were born, right? So the more and more people that really start to do some of this internal work, it really benefits all of us, because then maybe we can spend less time arguing and more time just going, wow, that is a cool perspective. I saw it this way. Oh, mine's cool too, right? So
Yeah. I think we've, what she's referring to as well is, well, it wasn't recently, but a few months ago, when I started my transition and my shift, basically we got into a pretty intense conversation. And at one point in time, I think we both felt that our friendship was ready to, we were going to part ways. But through about an hour of discussing everything and pointing things out, we finally were able to see each other's point of view and realize that the situation was completely neutral. Our own feelings and our own perspective is just what we put on it. And if we can realize that the situation's neutral and that the feelings are just that, they're just feelings, you can detach from it. So, and I wanted to discuss with you, since becoming a trainer, because you are a oneness trainer, what has been your path?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'll tell you, the reason why I first became a oneness trainer wasn't because I really felt called to go out into the community and do this. I had already been working in the prisons, volunteering in the prisons for a couple of years, and at the time you had to be invited to become a trainer. So I was invited, and I'm surmising that it was because of the work I was doing with the inmates, that if I could go in and begin initiating some of the inmates, then they could become a self-sustaining, community, if you will, where they could start giving Diksha to one another, because my class that I did in conjunction with the book was really a 7-week class. While they got Diksha for 7 weeks, after that, unless, and a couple of the prisons didn't even let people take it more than once, but if they wanted to come in, they could continue getting it. But that was initially my thought process. Unfortunately, I got everything all set up. By the time I talked to the director of the prisons, he said, no, I don't think that that's really necessarily a good idea, because then we have sort of a competition thing, and how do we decide who gets it, who doesn't, and all of those kinds of things that you have to really think about in that kind of community. But I had already got my thing, so I went over and did that. I've done a couple of initiations for the community, and since then my prison work has stopped because the director retired, so I'm being guided to go in another direction. So I can't tell you that I have been as active as we have a couple of other trainers here in town. Deborah, who's fabulous and has done so much for this community. Neil, who's relatively new, I think within the last year. He's really doing some things with Susan, who's really brand new, like in the last couple of months. So they're doing some things, and I think that they feel really called to do that kind of work. Mine is a little bit different. Now I think my goal is, after the prisons, to really move into the corporate world with this. So I'm not sure what that looks like or how that's going to go, but that's the direction I'm heading.
Okay, and you do what's called brain balancing. Can you explain to us a little bit about that?
Well, when I was in India, I found it really fascinating. Bhagwan said, who is, by the way, the founder of Oneness University, for those of you who don't know, but he had said that the reason why we feel so separate and have so many problems and so much resistance is because we have too much activity in the parietal lobes of the brain, which is in the back. And that Diksha, when you receive, actually causes a biological shift in brain activity, where it quiets the activity in the parietal lobes and it increases activity in the frontal lobes. Well, my wonderful, always believing mind, really was very skeptical and was like, oh, that's crap. And so I came back and, of course, set about doing some research and trying to prove Bhagwan wrong. And what I ended up discovering is that I think he's not only right, but that I'm pretty certain he's right. But I came across a technology that really allows people who maybe are not as open. Like, for example, I have a lot of physicians, scientists, business people who might not be open to some of the spiritual teachings like we are, that are, second nature now, to come in and start working on elevating consciousness by using a technology to balance the brain activity and to do the same things that Diksha does. It's a lot more expensive. So I guess depending on your belief system, you can spend a lot of money for this, or you could spend a little money and get Diksha. So, but it really, all the modalities, I think, that are out there, whether it's energy work or, whatever, there's so many now holistic modalities for healing. They really all have one goal, and that is to free us from some of these bonds that we have to certain belief structures or whatever it is, and that are affecting our day-to-day experience. So
awesome.
Yeah.
How would you recommend or suggest to someone that is constantly battling with that mind chatter? How would you just tell them to release it, to get rid of it, to even silence it for a little bit? What's the best way to do that?
Well, that's one of the teachings. What you resist persists. So just by nature of the question shows that first, I found, at least for me, I didn't really think that I thought my thoughts would stop when I meditated, right? That was the first thing. I was like, I've got all these thoughts. Well, I closed my eyes and I started to think immediately. Lots of thoughts. They kept going. So when it came to a meditation, I was like, I suck at this. So I quit for a while until it kept coming back to me. So I think that what happens is, there's a lot of things that you can do to help diminish mind chatter. But I think at first, part of it is accepting it, that it's there, and recognizing that we have a choice of, when it comes to the mind. And I remember learning this at Tony Robbins. He would talk about what you focus on. So recognizing that thoughts are coming in doesn't mean that we really have to focus on them. For example, if I'm sitting here and I close my eyes and I want to start to find some stillness or silence, all of a sudden here comes the thought, oh boy, I'm hungry. What am I going to have for dinner? Now, at that moment, I have a choice to let that thought just pass by, or I can engage with that thought and I can start thinking about my options. Do I want to make some food? Do I want to go through a drive-through? And then I can give energy towards that whole thought. So I think for me, at least in, when I'm talking about meditation to people who haven't done it before, I use the analogy like a bus stop. If you're standing at a bus stop and a bus comes along, it opens its doors, do you have to get on? No, you don't have to get on. And if you don't get on, what will happen? Another bus will come by at some point. And they come by regularly. And each time you have a choice to let it go by. Now, the more that you let the thoughts go by, the slower they seem to come. And then you get sort of into that sort of peaceful, floaty, Zen sort of space that we're all really looking to find. But at first, I think it's really about acceptance of what it is, instead of having the internal battle of just stop thinking, right? Because that doesn't work. I tried, trust me.
So for those that are interested, obviously, in reading your book, 7-Course Meal for the Soul,
yes,
how would you explain it?
Well, for people who are seekers that have been on the path for a while, I hallucinate that it's probably a little remedial. Although when I read through it, I just read through it again a couple of months ago, I was really impressed with how much really good stuff is in there. It really does have a lot of information, a lot of things, a lot of various teachings. So it also does grow with you as your consciousness elevates. People tell me all the time, I'm like, I just read it again and I got so much more. That's because as your consciousness shifts, you can see more, you learn more, you can apply more, you have more insights. and those kinds of things. But really, I think it's written at probably about an 8th grade level. It takes some of the teachings. When I would read and was first trying to make sense of this whole, inside world and spirituality, I would have to reread some of the things like 4 times. Like I'd read it and I'd be like, what was that? And I know I have a decent IQ, so I'm like, I don't know. So I had to just keep reading it until it finally, I got it. So I try to just put it in simple terms so that even beginners can hopefully benefit and not think that it's only about incense and, Om, right? That we do this not because of the peace that we necessarily feel, but because when we do this, benefits our life, our experience. You know what I mean? It's like, I feel better. I'm healthier. My relationships are better. I can make more money. I have a better or more enjoyable experience of this thing we call life. So that's why, at least in my mind, there's got to be some practical benefits. Otherwise, I would stay in meditation 24 hours a day. It's a very fun place to be, but then, well, that's kind of like being dead, maybe. Yeah. So since I am here, I do want to live and experience some things. So
what is speaking of what do you think that the next step in your life will be as far as your growth? Where do you want to go with things?
Well, I have to tell you right now, the last week, I've been getting all of these things about clarity. Mm-hmm. So it's very clear to me that I need to get clear on what it is that I want to create. And I think that's been kind of a little bit of a challenge, at least for me on this path, because when you come to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm surrendered to the divine. What do you want me to do? I'm here to serve. I'm here to, assist, work through me, whatever that looks like. Well, by doing that, I also recognize that I'm taking myself out of the creator role and that there really is a place for both of those things. So while before my awareness of this thing called awakening, I was very much about this, and this. I was very specific about what I knew what I wanted. Then I came all the way to the other side where I was open to whatever was happening. Well, now I think I'm ready to come back into the middle and find some balance and know that I can still create and let the divine work through me with whatever it is that I choose. So
I like that.
Well, it's kind of like this. Here's another one that I'll share with you that's similar to that. When I was in India for my 3rd time, going through the trainer initiation, it was so... Because what was happening to me is I was having an awareness that a lot of people have. All paths lead to the one. It really doesn't matter what religion you practice. It really doesn't matter what method you practice, because all of them are really taking us to the same place. So here I was enjoying that awareness, going, wow, they all go to the same place. So, I don't have to really identify with one. And when Bhagwan said, look, you've got to pick one because you are here and you are walking through an experience. So you get to pick which one you want. Which kind of awakening experience do you want? Do you want one that's like a Christian awakening, like Jesus, with the heart chakra? Do you want one like the Buddha with, more of your third eye? So, and each one offers a different experience. So that, I think, is the same thing. I'm having that same awareness. I still get to choose the path I walk to get there. But I also am very open to the fact that along the way, I'm of service. I don't know if that makes sense. So
no, it does.
I've got to spend some time really getting clear on what I want to create. I'm excited and a little scared at the same time. So
how do you, this just popped in my head, but how do you feel when you have something that you want so clearly in your mind, but yet it's not what other people want? How do you make what you want manifest?
Well, okay, so I can't tell you the gentleman's name, and I wish I could, because he totally deserves credit for this, because it was a huge awakening for me, or awareness, insight. But what he talked about is manifesting. You know, if you really look at the way traditionally how we believe manifesting works, is that we consciously think of something, or maybe even subconsciously, we have a goal and we put some energy there and then we manifest it. But what happens is, I think it becomes clear to everyone pretty quickly that you can manifest some things and they happen and you're like, wow, I'm really good at this. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden you'll want something and that one won't show up and you're like, wait a minute, I'm not doing anything different. What's going on? Is there something that I missed, or does the process work? The mind starts throwing in doubts and, you know, all of this. So I listened to this gentleman. There was a recording online, and he started talking about how he now had a new way of looking at manifestation. Mm-hmm. And when he shared it, I was like, it totally resonated in me. I was like, truth, that really manifestation is really more about getting into the flow. Because if we manifest something and it shows up, that's because what we wanted was in the flow of our soul's destiny, goals, dreams, desires, whatever it is. If we try to manifest something that isn't in alignment with the soul's goals, dreams, or desires, it doesn't show up. So instead of thinking about it that we're creating it, it's that when we're in the flow, we start to want the things that the soul wants. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it happens. So that's where, when I got that, so it sounds a little bit, it's just a different way of looking at it. But that's what I think. I think that, oh my gosh, my ego's trying to manifest that. And it wants it for a particular reason. You know, money's an easy one to talk about because everyone wants to manifest money. But let me tell you, if your soul has something that it wants to learn, experience, grow from, whatever it is that requires you to be in a place of not having money, I promise no matter how much you focus on getting money, whatever your soul's goals, dreams, and desires are going to trump whatever the ego wants. The ego wants... You know, I posted that thing the other day. You know, it's funny that we ask God to change our situation, mm-hmm. but yet we are in that situation to change us. Mm-hmm. And so it's really kind of an odd paradigm that I'm really moving into, but it's like a new suit. I haven't fully, grown into it yet. So, but that's where I'm at right now. Who knows? Ask me tomorrow. You know how it is. It might be different.
Might change, yeah. Right. So how can you tell the difference between what your soul desires and what is your ego or your thoughts running wild?
Well, that's what I'm working on right now. But I'll tell you, there's one real hint, and it has to do with love. Mm-hmm. If it's coming from love, it's a pretty good clue. It's for your soul. If it's coming from fear or anything besides love, it's probably not true, which is the not self, the ego, and that's really hard. But that's at least my guideline right now of mm-hmm. how I'm trying to differentiate, because some things I'll know. There are other things that are a little bit fuzzy, and you're like, wait a minute, is that an ego thing, or is that really true? So that's my litmus test right now. If it feels loving, if it has to do with love, then it's probably my soul. If it's anything else, it's probably the ego still holding on, trying to control everything.
Yeah, I've noticed that it still continues. Mm-hmm. So since going through your shift, and what I've noticed as well is our ego, obviously, it still does have a grasp on us. We're just mm-hmm. able to see it from a new point of view now.
Yeah.
What have you seen through your own ego since going through everything, basically? What have you recognized about yourself?
That I'm full of shit. I mean, honestly, it really is. The stories that we have in this head of ours, we have built so many structures to make the ego right, correct, mm-hmm. accurate, everything we've learned, and most of it is complete bullshit. So that's, I think, probably the biggest thing. You have to walk in. You have to be willing to be, Bhagwan, Oneness University, again, talks about inner integrity. Inner integrity is about the ability to be honest with yourself. If you don't want to go out and tell everyone that you're a big scaredy cat, you don't have to. You have to just be able to see it, where you are afraid. If someone asks you, right, hey, what are you afraid of? I'm not afraid of anything, right? Because the ego's decided that it's not supposed to be afraid, because if it's afraid, then it's a loser, or, whatever it is. So I have no fear. I have courage. I move through everything, da-da-da-da-da, right? Well, there is part of you, there's part of all of us that is afraid. And it's usually at the core and buried under some other things. So you have to really be willing to look at the truth first and then accept the truth. And with that acceptance, it's love. It's liberated. So, human beings, here's another thing, we manipulate everything. That's another thing I learned about my ego. Everything I do is about the end in mind. And that's how we've all been trained. We go, geez, I want this person to smile. So if I do this and tell a joke, they'll probably smile. If I want this job, I need to do these things. And we end up doing these things that we really don't enjoy, but to get to an end. So we manipulate our choices to get something at the end. So that I find really, really fascinating, and how much that is so a part of everything that I am. It's really ingrained. So I don't know if it's just me or all of humanity. I'm pretty sure we've all been taught that this is why we do things. Why do you save money? In case. But again, most of these things are done out of fear. Again, all about the ego. So if we can wake up every day and live in love, right, then abundance flows and all of that. But boy, the ego grips because it's afraid. It doesn't have faith in it. It doesn't believe that that's really true. It doesn't believe that we'll sustain, because we've been taught you got to save money for a rainy day. You got to be prepared for all of these things, because life can sure kick you in the ass, right? So anyway.
So how do you live in the present moment, in relationships that are in turmoil, in going through work when you're struggling, anything? How do you live with inner integrity and be honest and loyal to people around you, and live in that present moment when you have fear of a relationship ending, fear of losing your job, fear of what just may happen tomorrow, because the constant mind chatter just keeps going and going. Well, what if this person does that, or what if this person doesn't love me, or so on and so forth? How do you deal with that?
Well, I guess that's why they call it a warrior, is all I can tell you, because that's what it feels like. It's almost like you go into battle with that. And, you get Diksha, right? You get declutched from the mind, so that while the ego still has a script, I don't know if you experience it this way, but it's almost like I got to step a few inches away from the ego, so that I could actually see that it is not me, but yet I still wear the suit. I still wear the Angi Covington suit every day. I introduce myself as Angi Covington, but I have the ability to hear and see my bullshit. And when I see it, all I have to do is call it. I'll give you an example. In a personal relationship that I'm in, I actually just wrote someone a letter, right? And I wrote the letter, and it was one of those things like everything in the letter was true, right? Because it was the ego. I knew it was the ego that I let it sit for a day, and I went back and read it. And just in reading it gave me a closer shift into inner integrity, because I got to read it now and listen to it, because I wasn't in the emotion. The feelings had passed. Now I can read it, just like, you've had this. You hear from a friend calls you up and they're telling you their whole story, and like you're there, but they're really bothered by it. And in some cases you're like, really? Right, why is that bothering you so much? You may not say that to your friend, right? But you might be thinking that. You get to now be your own friend. You can read the letter now, or I can anyway. I read the letter and go, oh my gosh, this is so not true. This is all BS from the ego. Seeing it frees you from it. Like, it really is. So Anyway, that's the best I could tell you right now.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I want to thank you so much for coming tonight. You have been such an amazing person in my life. For those that don't know, when I shared my story 2 weeks ago, Angie was actually the one who saved my life, pretty much. She's the one who called the ambulance, and she's been a dear friend of mine through this whole awakening shift, whatever you want to call it. Just a beautiful part of my journey, and I'm so grateful to have her. And look forward to many, many years of friendship and growing together. So I want to thank you very much again for coming tonight, and thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I will see you again in another 2 weeks, and have a great night.
We're dorks.
Good job.
We're done, right? We're off. We can talk now.